Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Hey, what's going on out there in fantasy land? It's your boy Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com alongside Dwain McFarland of EstablishTheRun.com. We are the Fantasy Football Hustle. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you're all doing well and are safe at home in hashtag quarantine life. We're doing pretty well here because we have something new to talk about in fantasy football. The draft has come and gone. Thank you to everyone who joined us during the first night of the NFL draft, as Dwain and I went on our YouTube channel and broke down all of the fantasy relevant first round picks. So we're not going to hit on those guys tonight. If you want to hear about the first round draft picks, we have them all on our YouTube channel. Search Fantasy Football Hustle, subscribe to the YouTube channel. A lot of great content upcoming over there. And if you're listening on the podcast, be it Apple, Google, whatever, give us a 5-star review. Make sure you're subscribed, tell a friend, retweet us on Twitter, whatever you got to do. But welcome in, Dwain. How's it going, man?
Man, I'm good. I'm super excited to talk about, these guys. I had fun last week, hitting on all the first round guys, putting that stuff out there on YouTube. So if folks haven't got to see it, they can go check that out on our channel. Got quite a bit of good feedback on it. But yeah, super excited. I think a lot of them, the bulk of fantasy, guys that everybody was excited about, of course, went in second and third and fourth round. So I think we got tons of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, and the funny thing about those videos, before we dive into tonight, I never thought our most popular video would be Brandon Ayuk to the 49ers. And then off air, Dwain and I are watching the show together, right? So we would come on live when we want to do a hit, and then we go back offline kind of into like a waiting room, right? And as we all know, Dwain's a Cowboys fan. I'm an Eagles fan. The Cowboys are on the clock. So we're just waiting for them to make a pick. And my TV is about 10 seconds ahead of his. So I see the CeeDee Lamb pick come across, and I just like slam down my pen, throw something across the room. Dwayne's like, "Oh, something wrong?" And he sees CeeDee Lamb come up, and I'm like, damn it, Dwayne. But
yeah, because Drake had just been like, "Hey, man, we got to trade up. Eagles got to trade up. Eagles got to trade up." So yeah, it was awesome to watch your hopes and dreams just like just deflate right in front of you. I love you as a person, but as an Eagles fan, I mean, you had it coming. So,
Yeah, we'll get to them later on. Don't you worry. Let's start things off, though, with a team that in a span of 7 picks made their offense incredibly more explosive. And that's the Indianapolis Colts at pick 34, taking wide receiver out of USC, Michael Pittman, and then making a trade to get Jonathan Taylor at number 41, 5'10", 226 out of Wisconsin. Just universally across the board, everyone loves Jonathan Taylor. They think he's going to come in and just kick Marlon Mack to the curb. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case because Marlon Mack's still a talented player in his own right. And Pittman is now going to give them that Vincent Jackson type big wide receiver that pairs well with Phillip Rivers. So they got an exciting receiving core there with Hilton, Campbell, Pascal, and now Pittman. So let's get your thoughts on the Colts with Taylor at running back and Pittman, a really exciting wide receiver for Frank Reich.
Yeah, no, I think it is exciting. And if you look at, Michael Pittman and you look at, one of the things I like to do is just really look at the post-draft, like press conferences and see what you can glean, from the general managers, from the coaches, because a lot of times, we talked about this a little bit last year. That's really a moment when they're really they're the most honest, right, about an assessment of a player and really what their vision is for him. Now, other things are going to occur down the road, such as, hopefully training camp and all those sorts of things. And that may start to change the view they have of a player. But right now you get really, they'll kind of paint that picture, some better than others, of really how they see this player fitting, right? And when you look at a guy like Pittman, I mean, he's a guy they were super high on. Obviously, they took him with an early pick in the second round in a draft where, there was a lot of receiver depth. And so they had a chance to move back, but they just really didn't want, to leave, that spot. And if you really look at, what Frank Reich talks about, with Pittman, it's along what you said. I would say a little less Vincent Jackson, but a little more Alshon Jeffrey. Remember, Frank Reich, was with Doug Peterson when they won the Super Bowl. But yeah, Frank Reich did spend some time with Vincent Jackson as well. But if you look at, when the Eagles brought in, Alshon Jeffrey, I know it's a sore subject now due to his salary and he's aging, et cetera, but he really gave him, that big 50-50 rebounder type of guy. And if you look at what
Colts didn't have that.
Yeah, they didn't have that. So I think, they wanted to do that last year. The 1 year, $10 million contract, that they put out with Funchess, but Funchess got hurt early in the season. So Pittman's a guy they're super excited about. Reich was gushing about him, basically talking about he wasn't sure there was, a receiver better than him in the draft. Now, some of that is just, coaches, pumping up their guy. But the bottom line is really about what we talked about. It's just the fit. They see him as being a guy that they can use in the red zone. They see as a guy that can, move the chains. And so when you think about this offense and you think about the way a Frank Reich or even a Doug Peterson type offense works, it's pretty balanced. I still see T.Y. Hilton being the, number one receiver, this year on the team. Probably, 22, 23% target share if he can stay healthy. The thing with T.Y. is we know he's been banged up over the past couple of years, even longer than that. Some of it's the soft tissue type of stuff that'll crop up and knock him out for a couple of games. So there's potential here for Pittman, one, to come in right away and be as much as the number 2 guy in this offense, right? And there's some upside because if T.Y. goes down, that could force even more to him. And I think having Phillip Rivers there, we know Rivers is a guy that is willing to, give his receivers chances to win the ball. So if Pittman can come out, does strong in camp, I think he could have a pretty solid year as a rookie. I see him as being the number 2 option, probably. It could now again, when we talk about Frank Reich and you think about the history, the way of, that they spread these offenses out, there could be wide receiver 2 and option 3 and 4 could all be really close, right? They could all be in that 15, 14, 13, 16%, target share range. The good news is it's an offense that, typically ran more plays. Last year, they slowed it down with Jacoby Brissett, but Frank Reich is he's fine, with more of an up-tempo game. So you could have some volume there coming back with Phillip Rivers. And so I think Pittman, if you're in a dynasty league, Pittman has a chance to eventually be the wide receiver 1 on this team. I think the other guy that's still in play here, we've talked about him before, Drake, but just quickly hit on Paris Campbell. He's still going to play the slot, and everything I'm reading is that they're still super excited about him. He'll be operating underneath. So Campbell does have a chance. He's a second-year guy, but he was hurt most of last year. Neither one of them have chemistry yet with Rivers. So we'll see what happens as far as, what's, going to happen with any kind of mini camp or any kind of, training camp, what happens there and how the league handles the schedule. But neither one of them have had work. So it's not like one of them is off to a better start, than the other. So I think I see those 2 guys. If someone were to challenge Pittman for that number 2 role, it's probably Campbell. Of course, you could always have Jack Doyle. Could always sneak into the mix there, as well. But I think Pittman, and if they come out in most sets, Pittman's going to be on the field. I think Paris Campbell's going to depend more on when they're in 11 or they're wanting to use some kind of special package, to get him the ball as a playmaker. I think you'll see T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman out there in base sets. So I think that gives him a slight boost over Campbell in my mind.
You want to talk about fit, right? And some people, when they go into the NFL draft, they just say, God, I hope this guy lands with a good team. J.K. Dobbins, with the way he can run it inside, couldn't have landed in a better spot than he did round 2 with 55th overall selection going to the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Ravens led the NFL in rushing last year. You've got Mark Ingram. He's 30 years old. Next year, though, or after this year, they can easily get out of his contract owing him around $1 million. I looked that up last night. So,
yep.
For Dobbins, he can hang out there for a year and kind of go side by side with Ingram. Remember, Dwayne, that Gus the Bus had over 700 yards rushing as a backup last year. So,
right.
Wow, what a landing spot for Dobbins. It's probably running back 2, you'd say, coming off the board, 2 or 3 at least in these dynasty drafts.
Yeah, I think it depends, right? If it's and we need to hit Jonathan Taylor too in a second. I've just forgotten.
I'm sorry.
But no, we'll come back to him. It's good. That was my fault. I just went long on Pittman. That's what I do, Drake. So with J.K. Dobbins, yeah, I think if you're thinking dynasty, I like him as running back 3 off the board, just because of what you said. I see him being the guy here within the next year. And I think if something were to happen to Ingram or if Ingram were to falter, he could easily take that over this year. J.K. Dobbins, we talked to Matt Waldman. That was his number 1 running back on the board. He thought that this is a guy that could literally do everything. And if you look at, what the Ravens said, whenever he was there, because like you said, they've had success with nobody. So why did they feel the need to go draft a runner? I know a lot of people will actually argue with that, but they just talk about his ability to do everything. They talk about, just how he plays angry. So there are a lot of things that just fit in the scheme that they have, but I think he will easily, like you said, slot in. And remember, this is a team that has shown us over the last 2 years in the games where Greg Roman has been calling plays, it's pretty much been 3 backs, that or always 2 backs involved, sometimes 3. It's 2 backs plus Lamar Jackson, really, that they get involved. So there's going to be opportunity, and this offense creates big plays. They create, big holes, based off the action, especially when defenses are worried about Lamar Jackson running. So it's an offense where you can survive with a little bit less volume, or at least you have been able to so far over the last year and a half that we've seen Greg Roman's offense with Lamar Jackson. So while traditionally, we love volume as the number one thing, the caveat here is you can see some big efficiency from these running backs. And I think Dobbins is a guy that could, if Ingram went down, man, easily, you're talking about a guy that, and they could still choose to bring in another guy and run 2 guys, but Dobbins being so young, Dobbins being able to handle more, if he shows he can, I think the upside as a dynasty player, what you're looking at is like, man, if they give one guy all of this in 2 years and it's him, he could literally be the number one, running back, in fantasy. You're going to have to deal with Lamar Jackson stealing, some carries. So you don't quite put him in the territory of an Edwards-Helaire or maybe where Jonathan Taylor could get. They both have their own, things they've got to deal with, but they don't have Lamar Jackson that they have to deal with. So, but I still think that RB1 is going to be in his range of outcomes. If you just look at the talent, you look at the team, we like what the coaches do. So I'm excited about him. Just to say touch real quick on the Ravens. If you look at, what round was it that they took Duvernay?
They took round 3, 92nd overall.
Yeah, 3. Sorry, I want to make sure I got that right. Yeah. They were super excited. He's another guy that they really wanted to get. They feel like he's very versatile. They feel like he's a guy you get the ball to him and let him make plays in space. So now look at this. What last year it was Marquise Brown. This year you had Dobbins, and now you had Duvernay. You added Miles Boykin last year. I mean, this is an offense, man, that could be poised to be, if they hit on 2 of these guys plus another runner, and they already have Lamar Jackson. I mean, this could be an elite offense for years and years to come. The one thing you have to worry about in this offense is, man, and we've talked about it, like at every position besides quarterback now, they rotate everybody. It's tight ends, it's receivers. So that's the other thing I think you're seeing here. They just want to get playmakers, and they like to rotate them around. But I think Duvernay is a guy that, he's a sneaky late round pick in Dynasty. I don't think he's anything to think about right now in redraft because,
right.
there's so many guys he's going to have to deal with in front of him, and they rotate. But he's definitely a guy that if really what they're doing is looking at guys and they're eventually going to settle on a core, he could be included in that. And I know he's a guy that, again, he fits what they want, which is, just as many playmakers as they can get, and they can scheme it up and figure out how to get it to him. So I do think he has long-term upside. Real quick, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, this has probably been beat to death, but as soon as the pick was made, I was super excited about it. Do the Colts have the very best offensive line in the NFL? No, probably not. Is it maybe a little bit overrated? Some people may argue, but I would still argue it's one of the better lines in the league.
Yeah. PFF and they rated him 3rd, I believe, in run blocking last year.
Right. And I mean, they run a lot of the power concepts. You get behind guard Quentin Nelson. I mean, that man, Jonathan Taylor, he can truly run zone or power, but man, when you put him in power and you let him do his thing, you let him, I know this is like cliche, you let him get downhill, use his big body, beat up on linebackers. He's a great fit. He could be he could be unstoppable in this type of offense. And so that's another guy they traded up, right?
Yeah.
To come back up and get him. So he's a guy that they highly coveted. They knew that they were probably going to have a shot at a running back in the 2nd round, but I think it says a lot that they went ahead and pulled the trigger. The thing you're going to have to deal with right now on Jonathan Taylor is, in the post-draft comments, from, Ballard as well as Frank Reich, it's really, they see it right now, at least this year, being more of a 1-2 punch. But here's what I'll say. Marlon Mack is someone else that's always also battled injuries. So it's literally, it's one of those things where Jonathan Taylor will probably start off the year. If you're thinking redraft, he's probably going to be overpriced because you're going to be pricing in as a savvy owner. Man, Marlon Mack's probably going to have part of this backfield, and you're right. And they could even rotate in a 3rd guy, from a receiver as a, receiver If you think about, the way they like to run the scheme, when you think about Naheem Hines and you think
He's
about
still
what Phillip Rivers likes. So yeah, he's probably going to be overpriced in redraft, but you're paying for his upside. Where I do love him though, and I'm fine with him at the 1 or the 2 is in Dynasty. Let's see where his ADP settles out on redraft. If you take him, you're probably going to have to overpay, but the upside is if he just overtakes the backfield, or if Marlon Mack gets hurt, you could have, the league's leading rusher. So, it's not like you're paying for nothing. You're paying for the right fit with a really great player. You just know how preseason gets, Drake. People go nuts. One highlight reel run from this dude. He's going to be a guy that if you want to draft him, draft now, and try to target him. And maybe you get him in the 3rd or the 4th round of a draft. But by the time the season gets here, when this guy breaks off a few runs, he's going to be a 2nd round. He's very easily could be a 2nd round pick in redraft.
Let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. They have obviously added Joe Burrow at the number 1 overall pick, and they gave him a toy in the 2nd round with the first pick of the 2nd round. They add T. Higgins, the big, tall wide receiver out of Clemson. Now, ideally, he's going to be the A.J. Green replacement because Green, I don't believe, is long for Cincinnati. But let's talk about this year because that's where we are. Green's on the franchise tag. You're going to have Green with Higgins on the other side, Boyd in the slot. You've got a rotational piece in Ross, and you still have a tremendous running back in Joe Mixon, an improved offensive line with Jonah Williams, who didn't play at all last year, who was their top pick. So the Bengals have some weapons here for Burrow. What he does with it in year 1, who knows? But T. Higgins, a guy in redraft, I want nothing to do with. Dynasty, though, down the line, he could be the big red zone threat for the Bengals.
Yeah, and I think, if you think about Zach Taylor's offense, which we've talked about, he comes from Sean McVay. He's going to mostly run 11 personnel. So you're going to see a ton of A.J. Green, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd on the field with John Ross rotating in with those guys. T. Higgins will have to beat out Ross, but Ross quite often beats out himself with his hand issues. Ross has shown that he has electricity, right? If you get him involved in the right way. You think about, early last season, he was kind of the waiver wire pickup of week 1 and 2 at receiver before, he got, struck by another injury. So it's not like he has zero competition, but Tyler Boyd's going to be locked in the slot. AJ Green, as long as, he's, there and they're saying they're excited, is going to have a role, but he could become injured too. So I think T. Higgins, I'm still willing to draft late, even in redraft. And the reason why is just because, I know they're going to run 11 all the time. So he's going to get on the field no matter what. But if AJ Green has another issue with an injury, T. Higgins could easily find himself as the, number 2 guy behind Tyler Boyd. And the thing I like about T. Higgins, and you look at, again, this kind of goes to the draft comments, with where the Bengals took him, again, there's a lot of receivers they could have taken, and they could have traded down knowing that, hey, there's plenty of receivers in this draft, but they said no. They wanted to stick there. They wanted to make the pick. Higgins was their guy. And, even one of the reporters, when they were talking, they asked that exact question. They said, hey, it's such a deep receiver group. Why go ahead and make the pick there? Why didn't you choose, trade down? And they said, it wasn't just about the class. It was specifically about him. They felt if they moved down, they were going to lose him. And he's really the guy they wanted, even though a lot of us say, hey, this is a deep class. And so he's their handpicked guy. Now that doesn't always mean that it works out, but this is a guy they're excited to have, when they talk about him. They talk about him obviously being a guy that can really, also not just be a big red zone guy, Drake, but a guy that can really stretch the field, and being a guy that can really push the vertical, boundary of the field. And if you think about the Rams offense, that in thinking about where, Zach Taylor comes from, they like to have really 3 guys that can do everything. And so now I think Higgins was their pick because they felt he could do all of those things. He could be a guy that could stretch the field. He could be a guy that could work intermediate and still be a big play threat, run after the catch. And I think he's also their long-term plan for when AJ Green is gone. So in Dynasty, I agree. He's got to be more highly valued because I think, he's got an opportunity to become the number 1 receiver for that team in the next couple of years. I think Tyler Boyd is kind of where he's going to be. He's a 22% guy. And that's a decent amount, but I think Higgins could still end up being, like equal that and maybe even a little bit more because his game could end up being a little more versatile, as he learns. With him, he's got a lot of the traits, but if you see people talk about him, it's like, hey, he's not a finished product yet, by any means.
When you go to Denver, they have put the keys to the kingdom right here in front of Drew Lock.
Yeah.
A year ago, you added Courtland Sutton. This year, you give him Jerry Jeudy in the first round. Again, go to our YouTube page. You can see us talk about Jerry Jeudy. And then in the second round with the 46th pick, they take Penn State slot receiver KJ Hamler. This is a guy who's explosive out of the slot. That's primarily, I believe, where he's going to play. Last year at Penn State, 50 of his 56 catches came from the slot. Fast guy, great with the ball in his hands. You add that to Melvin Ingram. They got all the tight ends now with Fant and the guy whose name I'm not even going to try. We're just going to call him Big Al, the tight end they took later on this year in the draft. Man, oh man, in best ball, I'm taking a shot on Drew Lock every single time because these weapons, Dwayne, are just outstanding.
Right. Yeah, and who knows how many will hit. I mean, ultimately, these are later round picks. This is not super late, but we're not in the first round, anymore. Mm-hmm. We're not at the top of the second round. And data tells us that, they'll be lucky to hit on one of these guys, and it may be Jeudy. But theoretically speaking, and look, more could hit. What I like is, to your point, they do see the need. They see, look, we're not just going to hold down Kansas City. We're going to have to try to score a bunch of points. We'll talk about the Raiders in a little bit. They did the same things. Like they just all went out and said, let's try to have a track meet because we can't stop Pat Mahomes. Now, Drew Lock, I'm not a huge fan, but he was also a rookie. I mean, we've kind of got spoiled lately with quarterbacks that have come in and been able to really play above what we used to think a rookie could do. And that probably slants things a little bit. But, Drew Lock struggled in a lot of areas that I think are super important. But there's no denying what you said, especially in a best ball type format, or even if you're in a super deep league where you've got a lot of, bench stashes. I think Lock makes a great QB2, especially out of the gate. You see how things are going to go, and then you can move on if you don't want to, because to your point, they've definitely invested. We'll see, how Bunham,
good luck,
Hamler, all work out. I feel really great about Jeudy. You've already got Sutton, like you said. You drafted Noah Fant last year. So if I think about the pecking order, I think it's Sutton, is because he's a guy that's already demanded, once Emmanuel Sanders moved on, 25, 26, 27%, of the team targets on a week-to-week basis. It might have actually been, he had weeks where he was in the 30s. So I see him probably, being the lead guy. And then I would say Noah Fant is probably going to be, if I were like giving everybody a projection right here, right now, I would say that Noah Fant, is going to be the number 2 guy. He did some really good stuff for only being a rookie tight end. I liked his fit better in the offense last year because it was more of that Kyle Shanahan, a lot of movement, so the offense has changed, because now we've got, sorry, Drake, why's my mind, your old buddy from the NFC, from the Giants that just got fired is now their offensive coordinator. Why is my mind going blank?
Not McAdoo. Is it McAdoo?
No, it's not McAdoo.
Where are we talking here?
So, sorry, I got it. It's came back to me. So wait, no, sorry. Now I'm thinking of the Giants, Jason Garrett. No, I'm talking about for Denver. It was the head coach last year of the Giants. Shermer. God.
Pat Shermer. Okay, geez, we're all blanking.
Sorry, yeah, listeners.
I'm thinking Broncos. I'm thinking of Rich Scangarello, and he's with the Eagles now.
Yeah, because he left. Yeah, so what I was saying, Scangarello, I like that scheme better. But, we're going to see a ton of 11, personnel. I think you're going to see that. So, again, like you said, Locke is the real winner. I think Hamler is going to be really on the outside looking in. I think he's more of a nice, great playmaker to help out.
NFL. It's going to be better for the Broncos than it is.
It's not going to be as
fantasy.
Right. And I don't even think Hamler's going to be that huge in Dynasty. He's not going to be somebody I'm going to be targeting. You just have to think about it. They spent a second-round pick on Courtland Sutton 2 years ago. He's already shown he can do something. They spent a first on Noah Fant last year. He had a pretty good year as a rookie. They spent a first-round pick on Jerry Jeudy, who many people thought was the best receiver in this draft. And he's really good at getting open through separation, which is the opposite of Courtland Sutton, who is more of a, my ball kind of guy that, he's not as good of a route runner, but he can win, the one-on-one battle. So I think those guys are easily going to be the top 3 guys like Hamler, and even Albert O, they maybe are stashes in deeper dynasty leagues, but nothing I'm looking at is thinking going to contribute here in the next year, 2-3 years, most likely.
A few years ago, you may have taken Kerryon Johnson in a dynasty league and said, yeah, I've got this great, rock solid foundation running back in Detroit. Then with the third pick of the second round, the Lions go and take DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. So, at 5'8", 212, he's shifty, he can catch, he's got speed. He's a really good complete back in my mind. What does this do for Kerryon Johnson? Because he's a guy last year who couldn't average 4 yards a carry. I think he was at like 3.6 yards a carry while he was on the field. So this is a team that says, we want to run the football. This is going to be, our identity here because, this is just what we want to do with Patricia. So they go and they get Swift. He comes in now. Dwayne, let me ask, is he competing with Kerryon? Is he going to take this job from Kerryon? How do you draft these two guys in redraft or, in Dynasty? I think Dynasty-wise, obviously he's going to be the man. But for redraft, to me, this is going to be a mess because it looks like a nasty split RBBC.
Yeah, I think this one's a little bit tougher. And, we haven't really received anything, nuggets so far from the coaching staff about really, hey, we're going to go one way, or the other. It really sounds like they still plan on keeping Kerryon Johnson, involved. I do think that Swift will get the opportunity to be the lead guy. But the thing with Kerryon Johnson, yes, he's been very fragile, but he's also flashed. He was a second round pick, 2 years ago in 2018. Now Swift is a second round pick. I bet the way I see it right now is this year they're truly going to use both guys, right? I would expect both to be used. From a dynasty perspective, you're going to be a little higher on Swift because this almost certainly, unless Kerryon just blows up somehow, this probably means Kerryon's not getting another contract with this team. He's going to have to go somewhere else to try to get that. Not saying it won't work out, but it can be tough trying to find your second contract, even as a younger runner. With how stocked the league is and just how the league is viewing it, right? With the running backs, the whole running backs don't matter movement. We're definitely seeing the impact of that. So I think long-term Swift, obviously is the guy, to own. I think this year you're going to see more of a split. Now, again, if Johnson goes down, Swift could easily be, the main guy. He's got a 3-down set, he could be used, and he's nothing special per se in any single area, but he is a complete back. He can work the receiving game, he can work the running game if you need him. He's not great down inside the 5, but he's not bad. He can still do it. So he can be a complete back. And, the Lions are a sneaky offense that was off to a pretty hot start last year before the injuries started to pile up. Matt Stafford was even battling, injuries, he missed some time. Out of the gate, this was an offense that was moving the ball, pretty well. And like you said, they do want to, it's a big part of their identity, obviously, to run. This is Darrell Bevel. And so they like to take shots deep, all those sorts of things. And they, so they're set up to do that. They've got two runners that they can try to, really set things up off of. And then, they've got the receivers that can push, the vertical boundaries with Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. So, yeah, I like Swift. And he's a guy, honestly, Drake, in redraft, I may end up targeting him more because I don't anticipate him costing as much as some of the other guys that are really going to have the same problem that is facing them. Which
he'd be your fourth running back or something like that.
Right. And I think what you're going to see immediately, like with Jonathan Taylor and some of these other guys, I think people are going to jump on to, well, he's going to beat out Marlon Mack, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who we'll talk about in a minute. We already really talked about him. We love him. And he'll probably, still have, competition, from Damian Williams, but people are still going to be higher on him. Swift, if you kind of read social media and you read the way people are thinking, for redraft, he's probably going to settle in as a later, more of a mid to later round pick. When I say late, not like, 10th or 11th round, but he's the kind of rookie you could probably still get, especially early on in the 6th, 7th round. And if something happens with Kerryon Johnson, he still gives you upside. Versus the other guys you're going to have to draft sooner. And they are still battling because people are just going to be more quick, I think, Drake, to just write Kerryon Johnson off than they will be Marlon Mack or they will be even Damian Williams.
And I don't think necessarily, and I've tweeted about that just because a guy gets drafted, they're immediately pushing out the guy who was there last year. Like Marlon Mack was a very productive guy last year. He's a 1,000-yard rusher. And as we look at the next team here, and what we like to do here on the Hustle, if you guys listen throughout the years, we like to talk about scheme. Dwayne is a fantastic resource for coaching scheme and what these guys are trying to do. And one of the guys that we've pinpointed last offseason was Matt LaFleur. He went to Green Bay, and what kind of offense is he going to try to instill? Is he going to bring that Kyle Shanahan type offense up there to Green Bay? And it looks like with the way they drafted this year, and everyone's heard about them not taking any receivers, maybe that's the case. They want to maybe pound the rock a little bit, and with the 62nd overall pick, they took A.J. Dillon out of Boston College. Now, this is a big guy. He ran a 4.5, he's 247 pounds. I saw him just destroy Syracuse left and right every time they played. Not a guy who's going to make a lot of people miss, but hey, if you're Aaron Jones and you had 16 touchdowns last year, and here comes this 247-pound, steamroller in the door, I'm pretty nervous that I'm not going to be getting 16 touchdowns again this year.
Yeah, I think that could be a problem. We talked to Matt Waldman about A.J. Dillon as well. He's a lot higher on A.J. Dillon than a lot of other people are. Look, I mean, Twitter blew up, the Packers, and I get it for their draft day. They probably took things ahead of where they should, but what you can clearly see are the blueprints of what they want to do, like you said. We started seeing it last year. So, I mean, they make a move, obviously, in the first round around Jordan Love, but really what I'm speaking to here is in the third round, they take the tight end, which really they're moving to fullback. I think they want this. They're hoping this is their Kyle Juszczyk with Josiah DeGuara. And Matt Waldman actually really liked him. He's a guy that you can move around. He can do some things, but he's a really good blocker. Then you had A.J. Dillon to go along with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams and go back to the combine. And you heard what LaFleur said, that actually Matthew Berry, put out an article on this, and his 20 takeaways from the combine. This was one he had. He said, hey, they're looking to add another back, and they'd like to rotate all three of them. So if you think back, to last year, and I'm actually trying to pull it up real quick here on the fly, Drake. If you think back to last year and how things, worked, for Aaron Jones, a lot of his production, like you said, came from the touchdowns. And look, we loved Aaron Jones. And I mean, when he was great, with his touches. But if you look at, from a standpoint, of the rushing attempts, and you look at it from the games when Jamal Williams was available versus when Jamal Williams wasn't available, it was a more dicey proposition than what people probably remember, right? So if you looked in those first few weeks, you had Aaron Jones hovering around the 50 to 60% of the rushing attempts. And then you had Jamal Williams get hurt. And so in week 4 and 5, you had Aaron Jones getting 65% of the team attempts. But then as soon as Jamal Williams came back, he dropped down to the 52, 50. Then he had a weird game where it was 73%, but then 48%, 46%, 42%. So there were a lot of games where Aaron Jones didn't even get 50%, of the team's rushing attempts. And I think people quickly, forget that. And that was with Jamal Williams being the guy working in. And so now what we're talking about is a guy that's potentially better than Jamal Williams, taking on a lot of those carries. And now potentially Jamal Williams just working in more as the pass receiving down and the guy that's the pass protector. So I think Aaron Jones faces a legit challenge here and it's not about him, it's about his coach and his team really being on this thing of using three backs. I think they're going to do it, man. I don't think it's just talk. I think they're going to be willing to use the three backs. And I think that it's, you spent a second round pick on A.J. Dillon.
Yeah.
I think they're going to try to use him. I don't know exactly how it's going to come out. What I would anticipate though, is we could see Aaron Jones turn more into a between the 20s kind of guy. You see Jamal Williams become the 2-minute pass offense, which sucks because that's where you get all those extra dump down passes as a runner. And then you have A.J. Dillon take over a bigger role potentially inside the 5. We'll have to see how that all plays out. And Dillon could fall flat on his face and Aaron Jones could continue to be, just amazing and they can't keep him off the field. Always a possibility. But I think there's legitimate concerns here around Aaron Jones if you're targeting him at, his ADP.
Now, what you just described is exactly what the San Francisco 49ers, when healthy, are. And we talked about it last year. You've got in between the 20s guy, and then you got a guy like Matt Breida who will never see the end zone unless he breaks a long run. You've got kind of passing down work guy, and then you get on the goal line, and here comes Jeff Wilson Jr. stealing touchdowns. So you could see the guy from that tree, taking it to Green Bay. So interesting stuff that's going to be going on there in Green Bay. And they're going to have wide receiver issues. Didn't give any help to Devontae Adams on the other side.
Yeah, quick
Oh,
thoughts on that.
Lazard stinks. I can't be in on Lazard.
Well, Lazard's going to get a chance. Devontae Adams obviously is good. He's locked in for his 30% plus as normal.
Mm-hmm.
They did add Devin Funchess. So Marquise Valdez-Scantling still only year 3. And like you said, Lazard is a guy that's in competition. One name to remember, and we talked about him last year. And again, think about this offense. Think about how they like to tie. People blew him up on Twitter. They tie things to the running game. That doesn't necessarily mean that, all we care about is the running game. What they mean is they just want to make everything look the same, just like the 49ers do. And that's how you create these big plays. Is it a run? Is it a pass? And in that time it takes a defender to process that information. You create a mismatch where maybe you couldn't have created a mismatch before, because it's beyond just player skill sets. It's about the scheme helping to, supplement, player skill sets. So if you think about it that way, don't forget Jay Sternberger. So he's a guy they added in the 3rd round last year as a tight end, out of Texas A&M. He, on most people's boards, was the 3rd best tight end after Irv Smith was typically the number 2, and then typically your number 1 tight end on most folks. He would have been the 4th, because the 2nd would have been Fant, and then the 1st on most people's board was Hawkinson. So he was in the top 4 tight ends, and most people talked about him, despite going in the 3rd round, not being as far from those other guys as people might think, and more of it was around getting better as a blocker. Now, he did nothing in his first year. He got hampered by injury out of the gate. Got to get a little bit of playing time down the stretch, but Sternberger is just a name to remember, because tight end does get utilized in this offense. You're going to want to see, hey, is he getting more? Mercedes Lewis is the only guy in front of him, and Robert Tonyan. So, Sternberger could easily step in to be the guy after Devontae Adams. And, the other guys will just have to watch and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm not chasing any of those wide receivers this year. Let's go to one of my favorite wide receivers in this draft, and that is Laviska Shenault out of Colorado. And this is a kid who had offers to go to major universities, the LSUs, the Clemsons of the world, ended up going to Colorado, had injuries up and down the board, really hampered him. Although in 2018, he was an all Pac-12 selection. This kid is explosive with the ball in his hand, 6'1", 227. I'm excited for him to join this group. I think DJ Chark was slightly miscast as a 1. I think Shenault can become that number 1 in this offense, and you still have D.D. Westbrook in the slot. Boy, if they ever get a quarterback in there next year when they're picking 1st overall, this is a wide receiver group to be excited about in Jacksonville. Man, these are good playmaking receivers.
Yeah. If you just look at their at their roster, and you look at, again, kind of, if folks go look at the comments made after the draft, they see him, as a, thick-bodied receiver. He is a playmaker, but I think people forget, how big he is. He's like 225 pounds. So this is a guy
6'1", 227.
That can really do some things after the catch, as Matt Waldman talked about on our pod, a couple of weeks ago. He's also a guy that's better downfield than what people realize. And we all know, how much Matt looks at this stuff more than any of us. He'll say that, he's not perfect and he can miss some guys as well. But, in the things he saw with Shenault, he sees him, to your point, as being someone that can really do everything. Obviously, the Jaguars thought so too, because, is another receiver that goes in the 2nd round. I do still think DJ Chark is the one. I don't know that he's miscast or not, because he just took such huge steps forward last year. And he really showed to have a more versatile game than what we thought he had coming out of LSU. But man, I'm with you. I see Shenault as a guy that could challenge for the number 2 spot on the team this year, and it's going to be in that 15% target share range. And if you're in a dynasty league, I'm with you. I think his upside is to be the top guy on this team. I think, I would still probably lean DJ Chark there, because he's already done it, and I expect him to grow again as well. But Shenault, it could also end up being a deal where it's really these 2 guys together, both in that 20% target share range. So I think Shenault, his immediate fit as being a guy that can move around, he can play the Z receiver. You can let Chark play X. I don't doubt that out of they're going to mostly run 11, because this is, Jay Gruden. He's going to run 11 guys out there all the time. I don't doubt that, Shenault will win one of those 3 spots, and I wouldn't put it past him, to be the number 2 target on this team, because Chris Conley, look, did some nice things last year, but he's had a shot. D.D. Westbrook, they've tried to feed him the ball. They've tried to do those things. He just doesn't have the playmaking ability that a Chenault brings, right? Westbrook has kind of turned into almost, people thought he had more big playability, but he's almost turned in more of like this really underneath possession kind of guy that doesn't do as much as we thought he could after the catch. So I think Chenault's going to, step in and fill that void. He'll probably be on the field even in 2 wide receiver sets, if I had to make a guess. So I'm super, excited about Chenault, in Dynasty. And I even think in super deep leagues and redraft, he's a guy that could potentially have some value even as a rookie.
A guy I'm also excited about was, let me jump down to the next team here is Cam Akers for the Rams. 2nd round, 20th pick overall, 20th pick in the 2nd round, 52nd overall. Cam Akers out of Florida State. This is a guy who ran behind a poor line at Florida State. More than 30% of his runs, he was hit in the backfield. That's awful. Now he's going to a team where everyone wants to be down on the Rams and their blocking scheme. But I was seeing some things today that kind of led me to the contrary. Say it's not just the line. Maybe it was just really bad running back play. And Cam Akers is a willing blocker. He's a guy who can compete in the pass game. And, oh, by the way, you took him in the 2nd round when you just got rid of Gurley. I am not a Darrell Henderson guy. I have no time for him. I don't care if they took him in the 3rd round last year. The guy couldn't see the field last year with the corpse of Todd Gurley limping around. I love Cam Akers. I think in Dynasty he's going to be great. I think in redraft he's going to have value. And then they went a few picks later and they took Van Jefferson out of Florida because they just lost Brandon Cooks. So maybe he comes in and competes with Josh Reynolds for that 3rd spot. So the Rams have no money. They have to get cheap, and they just did with a couple of explosive guys from the Sunshine State.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Akers, the thing that worries me the most is whenever you look at people that, really study the film like way more than we do, the one caveat they had to Akers was, man, if he can land in more of a gap or power scheme, he's going to be good immediately. If he's asked to read zone, that's where they saw him struggle, and it may take him time to transition. Well, guess what? That was the same scouting report on Darrell Henderson last year, and that's what happened. He struggled, and we even talked about it in the preseason. We're like, man, if you're reading between the tea leaves here and you see Darrell Henderson's quotes in training camp, it's almost like he's trying to give himself a pep talk. I think I'm going to be better tomorrow in practice. I think I'm getting this. What was he talking about? About being able to run behind zone and get used to that versus running behind power, which is very different. He was following some sort of a pulling offensive lineman, typically a guard, and he's making his one cut off of that. Well, guess what? Cam Akers ran in that same kind of system, and he showed, that he has, some potential weaknesses in zone. So that scares me because of what we saw with Darrell Henderson last year. It can take some time. So I think you could very easily see Darrell Henderson this year figure it out, and Cam Akers go through the same thing as Darrell Henderson last year. You could also very easily see Cam Akers come in and show that he can process information more quickly and pick it up quicker than what Darrell Henderson did. So I think on this one, for me, I'm really torn, Drake, because I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, because I actually do think Darrell Henderson can be a good player. I think Darrell Henderson is a much more electric, big playback than what you get out of Akers. I think Akers is the better, hey, if I just had to pick one to be my guy that I had to run with and he could do everything, it's Akers, right, over Henderson. So, I mean, they both have their positives. But I think you're going to see a team that's going to really still try to keep both involved. I will say, when we've seen running backs stumble as bad as Henderson did out of the gate, it's not, it can be really hard, to see those guys actually ever end up doing anything. A lot of those guys end up being nothing, right? The hit rate isn't really good when you stumble that badly out of the gate. So I will say that that's going for Cam Akers. But my concern is just that, man, it's the same exact concerns, and, by people that I really trust in the scouting community that really study this stuff. And so that does have me a little bit concerned. But to your point, if I had to put, right now, a chip down on who's going to be the guy for the Rams and who has the better chance, I would say Akers, just because we have seen that a guy like Henderson, if they struggle, a lot of times they can continue to struggle. Now, the good thing, again, with Henderson is we know why, and hopefully he can adapt. But I'm just not as excited probably as the rest of the community, just because of, that caveat around the blocking scheme. But I totally get where you're at, because it seems like he's got if we looked at every running back that was drafted, you could say he's got the clearest path to just taking over a backfield. right?
I like him in the screen game. I think if the Rams can get back to throwing the ball to the running backs, which they got totally away from last year, and that was part of Gurley's great value when he was dominating fantasy football, was his work out of the backfield. So if you can get him out in space and work the screens sort of like he did at Florida State, I like him. I like what I've seen so far. And again, like you said, who knows? We don't know what these guys are really going to do, but he's got a creative play caller. And that's, if you want to put a chip on something, like you said, having a good offensive mind is always, the tiebreaker if you're going to draft between two guys.
Yeah. And the key on this is it won't be blind. We did this stuff last year. And I mean, we do need preseason, obviously, because what we would specifically be looking for is how's he doing in zone running plays? Because last year, remember, people were like, "Oh, look at Darrell Henderson. Everybody thought he was going to struggle. He's doing good right now." And it was either the first or second preseason game. Well, then when you go watch the runs where he did good, they were using power concepts, which we knew he was good. And then in the zone concepts, remember, we actually broke it down and said, "Here's what he did in zone. Here's what he did in power." So we'll do the same kind of thing, for folks this preseason, and we'll be able. We know what we're looking for. We know what we need to go look for, and we could gain a lot more confidence in Cam Akers if we go see he's killing it in zone. Cam Akers could move up my board more than any player this preseason. So I think that's a possibility.
The Chargers have a couple of running backs that people are kind of, everyone loves Austin Eckler, and then you've got Justin Jackson, who everyone's kind of like sneaky, like, "Oh, I'm going to stash Jackson. Nobody knows about him. He's going to be the ground and pound grinder here for the Chargers." And then they go draft Joshua Kelly out of UCLA in the 4th round. This is a big kid. He's a grinder. It's a great story of how he worked his way up to become the starter on Chip Kelly's team. And his sneaky receiver, he had over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. So this is a kid who can come in, be a great compliment to Eckler, and the Chargers can kind of just keep steamrolling until everybody gets hurt, because that's what happens to the Chargers.
Man, don't put that on him, Drake. But you're right; it does happen.
I'm not putting it on him. That's what happens to the Chargers. Yeah. Everybody gets fucking hurt. We know it.
Yeah, I think Justin Jackson's. And I mentioned this, I think, last week on Twitter. His job's in real jeopardy, and we could see him use 3 guys, because they've told us, while they love Eckler and he's going to get volume, if they can protect him from certain types of touches, they're going to do that. And I think they could potentially use Jackson and Kelly to do that. I think Jackson will enter camp, as the guy that, leads the way, but, he's not a super thick guy. Jackson's under 200 pounds, and, he's a guy that likes to run inside. So there can be some, major physical altercations, Drake, with linebackers and things like that. Mm-hmm. Jackson's a very elusive runner, but, when you look at a guy like Kelly, he is a guy that's probably, just from a build, he's 5'11", 212. He got a little more thickness to him. And he's also another guy that Matt Waldman talked very highly about as a guy that, probably being underrated, Joshua Kelly. So, again, these are guys that I like. Again, this takes, to your point, Justin Jackson's dynasty stock and redraft stock just took a hit. Josh Kelly is a viable, mid to later round. If you need to stash running backs, he's that kind of, pick in dynasty. Justin Jackson isn't just going to go away because he does have some talent. And like I said, we could easily just see this be, 2 guys, helping share for Eckler versus 1. But you have to look at it and think, man, it is, in an offense. Now we'll have to see how Justin Herbert, plays out, but it is an offense that could get better, right? You got offensive linemen that they've improved with, you've got plenty of weapons there. So, it's an offense that, can be down in the red zone, probably a lot more, than what they've, been used to. And again, a lot of that's been offensive line play. So yeah, Kelly is a guy that I like as a mid to later round, dynasty guy. As far as redraft right now, it's just super deep leagues. It's just a guy you throw, I'm talking 20-man rosters. You just throw him, he's a second to last round pick. You just throw him on there and see if an injury happens in preseason.
The Raiders are adding receivers at an alarming rate. Like, it's going out of style here. So the Raiders are nabbing up everybody. They get Ruggs in the first round. Again, if you want our first round reactions to these guys, go to our YouTube page, search Fantasy Football Hustle Podcast. You'll find all our stuff there. Please subscribe to that channel. They also added Lynn Bowden, who's a guy who can play 8,000 positions. He ended up playing quarterback for half the season last year. You can also play him at running back, some wide receiver. Then they got this big kid, Brian Edwards, out of South Carolina, 6'3", 212. Looked like someone who could push Tyrell Williams. So we won't spend a ton of time on the Raiders, but for Derek Carr, a guy who likes to work the middle of the field and not push it down deep, you've got Ruggs, you've got Tyrell, you've got Renfro in the slot. Don't forget about him. We added Bowden, we added Edwards. Oh, and there's Darren Waller to go along with Josh Jacobs. So just like we talked about with Drew Lock, it's all in front of you, Derek Carr. Make something happen or you're out of here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we said earlier, these teams just want to, they're trying to figure out how do they hang with a team like Kansas City. They, like you said, took Ruggs in the first, round. We already talked about him. But man, the pick that I think I get the most excited about is Brian Edwards, in the third round, because this is a guy that a lot of people in the draft community were really high on, and he's kind of dropped down the board with some people. But I mean, this at one point was a guy that, was potentially going to be the top receiver, taken, or one of the top 2 to 3 receivers taken, in this class. So taking him in the third round, the Raiders obviously saw something. And like you said, they even did that, back to back. You got Lynn Bowden, which they're really going to use more as a runner and move around guy. That kind of hurts Josh Jacobs' upside as a 3-down back, because now you've already just re-signed Jalen Richard, to a little bit of money. And then now you add Lynn Bowden. I still love Josh Jacobs, but I think what you're potentially looking at here is him having competition as the guy getting the passing work out of the backfield for the foreseeable future. So that's kind of too bad. Josh Jacobs could actually be a guy that does that, but the upside is maybe this is an offense that's going to actually improve. I mean, last year, really all they had was Darren Waller. I mean, and Hunter Renfrow had some flashes, but and Tyrell Williams out of the gate, had some touchdowns, but they just couldn't gain any consistency. So I like what they've done. To your point, Edwards is the guy that I like, getting later in Dynasty. I think he's the one that's more likely to eventually, and I could be wrong about this, become the true kind of number one there if he's got that true upside ceiling. I think Ruggs, early on, is definitely going to be the guy that gets more work. But I think Edwards is the guy that long-term potentially has more ceiling, at least in my mind. So, and if I think about this offense right now, again, it's another type of offense when you look at John Gruden and his history. I won't talk about every team here, but he's pretty balanced. He doesn't typically have one guy that he goes 30% to. Now, a super talented person can change things, but when I look at a guy like Ruggs and his weight and trying to keep him healthy, I see Ruggs as being if he could get to 20% target share, they would probably be elated. I think Darren Waller is going to stay, he's already proven he can do it, and he's a major mismatch, as a guy that's just an athletic freak against linebackers and safeties. Just nothing's going to change with that, and he operates in the area of the field that Derek Carr loves. So I still see Waller as the number one. I think this year you'll see Ruggs challenge, for that number 2 spot. Can't forget Hunter Renfrow and what he did. The problem is they're not going to run 11 all the time. Gruden likes to still run out these 12 and 21 packages based on game script, and he'll go big, so he truly will rotate back and forth. If they're behind, you're going to see a lot of 11. In games where are more competitive, they're going to he likes to keep that, pound you in the face running game active. So in those situations, Renfrow just isn't going to be on the field. So Brian Edwards this year is really more just of a long shot. I don't think he's going to do much in redraft, but as far as Dynasty goes, he might be the guy, like I said, that I like the most, especially given the price you get on him.
It's the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast. Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined alongside Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here. We're rolling through some of the teams here that made moves in rounds 2 and 3 and how they're going to affect your fantasy fortunes in 2020. We want you to subscribe on iTunes. Give us a good review over there. We appreciate it. And get on YouTube and search Fantasy Football Hustle podcast. Subscribe there because please, 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 we're going to beg you until we hit to 1,000 subscribers there. So, Dwain, let me ask you something. If you could draft a 6'3", 207-pound receiver that runs a 4.38 that averaged 15 and a half yards a catch and 12 touchdowns last year, would you jump on that guy?
Probably just sign me up.
Well, not if you're the Eagles, but the Jets did, because in the second round, once the Eagles foolishly passed on Denzel Mims, Joe Douglas went and scooped him right up. So the Baylor product now goes alongside Brashad Perriman. Crowder's in the slot. You've got Herndon. Now, again, teams putting weapons around young quarterbacks. Sammy Darnold's got Le'Veon Bell behind him. If that line can be any sort of productive and keep him upright, the Jets have a chance here. Boy, oh boy, look, Perriman on one side who can fly. Mims, a big, fast guy on the other side. Whoo! Jets got something cooking here.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of unknowns, I'll say, but I think the upside of what they've added, right, is big. I mean, Perriman just never been able to stay healthy, did show a flash last year, even as being the guy that, they really needed to depend on. So he was seeing, potentially, the best coverage from the other team. Now, it may not have been, the toughest matchups, but, he came through, and he had come through, that in the first time. He came through at the end of the year for the Browns. The previous year, more as just a vertical guy. And then he showed at the end of last year what he can do when given the opportunity to really, expand, upon that and not just be the guy running down the sideline, saying, hey, look at me, just chunk it up here. He did a lot of his damage, on, intermediate type slant routes and stuff. So I'm super excited about Perriman, but man, Mims, this is the guy that when I look at it, he may be the guy I'm getting like the most excited about. Now, Sam Darnold's still an unknown, but when I look at Mims, man, like if again, I love the other players, but you do have to take landing spot into consideration. Judy landed on a roster with another really young receiver that already has, shown he can hog 25% of targets. And you got a tight end that we talked about that did some nice things as a tight end and is probably going to take another step forward. You got the Cowboys CeeDee Lamb, who I really love, and he's going to be a really good player who could eventually push Michael Gallup out of a role, but he's still got Amari Cooper signed long term. And he'll compete and etch out, a spot. But here with Mims, this is the guy where I look at it and think, okay, I like Jamison Crowder. Brashad Perriman, like I said, is interesting. But Mims, if he can come through and show some of the things like, again, going back to Matt Waldman, this was his number 2 graded guy on his board. Mims was only after CeeDee Lamb. He had Mims above Jerry Jeudy. So this is a guy, and our other guy that we love, Jay Moyer. I was talking to him, and he and Matt hadn't even talked about it. And he was like, man, I was like, who do you love at receiver? Who would you want to come on and talk about if they are a surprise pick, for some reason in round 1, and it's a receiver? He was like, Mims. Mm-hmm. So another guy that watches a ton of the stuff, and he loves Denzel Mims. So 2 guys that, I trust a lot, that know film better than we do, love him. And I see a potential for this guy to become, the long-term number 1, and there's upside for it to happen quickly, Drake. So I'm having a hard time looking at Mims, other than draft capital spent, and finding a way to really, just shove him down below CeeDee Lamb and those guys. Like he keeps, when I put him on a list, like he keeps ending up right there, on there, right? Because of the draft capital and the talent. But then when I look at his draft capital is a little lower, but the talent is there. He's done a lot of great things. And man, he lands in a great situation where he could be the number 1 receiver on their team this year. I love Jamison Crowder, but Jamison Crowder, he is what he is. He's a 15 to 20% guy. He moves the chains for you. He's a slot receiver. Denzel Mims could be the guy, to really take on, a huge role here. And it could happen, really quickly, especially if Perriman flops again. I mean, it's going to be up to Mims.
Mm-hmm. That takes us down to our next team on our list, and guess who
you
it
sure
is?
You sure you want to talk about him?
Hang on. You know what? I got to do this, Dwayne. We're live on the air. I can't take it. I've been hearing every talking head talk about Jalen Hurts and how this is a big pick. I got to get a beer. We got to get into this. All right. So with the 53rd overall pick, the Eagles gut punched their fan base and took Jalen Hurts. Now, I try to be an open-minded fan. I don't want to be a homer. I don't want to say everything the Eagles do is great or everything they do is terrible. This is a pick that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense not because, hey, we value backup quarterbacks. Well, you value and you want to be a quarterback factory. That's what Howie Roseman says. Well, you have a young quarterback in Nate Sudfeld. Churn him out, make him better. You have Jameis Winston, who just signed for $1 million on the street. You could have gotten him. Cam Newton's still available. Andy Dalton just became available. Joe Flacco's available. let's not act like we have to, go find a backup quarterback before they all go away. You want to say, hey, we want him to become a Taysom Hill guy. Okay, so we just spent the 53rd overall pick on a guy who possibly will play at most 6 snaps a game. Taysom Hill was an undrafted free agent. They got him for nothing. He wasn't even originally with the Saints. So I don't want to hear the comparisons to Taysom Hill, because now you're taking Carson Wentz off the field, who you just gave a 4-year, $130 million contract to. When you have holes at corner where you're starting 5'8" Avonte Maddox opposite Darius Slay. When at safety, you're putting, Jalen Mills is going to try out there, and a kid, Will Parks, you got off the scrap heap from Denver. You could have taken a safety, and they got a safety in the 4th round later there. And then you need help at defensive line, and a kid from Iowa just went a few picks later. And, Denzel Mims was there. You want to help your quarterback. How about you give him Jalen Reagor on one side, Denzel Mims on the other? That's how you help your quarterback. Okay? So all you've done with this Jalen Hurts thing, and I've read some really smart people. I think it's Kevin Cole over PFF did a great job writing an article, and Shale Kapadia from The Athletic, and they make compelling points. But at the end of the day, a 2nd-round pick is someone who needs to be a starter on your football team. That is incredible draft capital that you're investing on a guy that you hope only plays 5 to 6 plays per game. And you gave your starting quarterback and fan base an aneurysm and a problem, because now you have a quarterback controversy. If Wentz twists an ankle, he's going back out there. There's no way he's letting this kid get on the field, because if he shines, now people are going to want Jalen Hurts all the time. And it just becomes, it becomes Nick Foles all over again. And God bless Nick Foles. I'll get off my soapbox here. But the Eagles, in my mind, made a mistake with this pick. If you got Jalen Hurts in the 4th round, does anybody care? No. The draft capital you spent on him was so immense. Later on, you made a trade. You got Marquise Goodwin, so we'll see what he can do. They also took a flyer on a bunch of receivers, and people are all excited. Look at all the speed the Eagles have. All right, you got John Hightower in the 5th round from Boise State. You got Quez Watkins in the 6th round from Southern Miss. I'm not going to go too crazy over guys in the 5th and 6th round. They're probably not going to make the team. But I just had to get that off my chest with this Jalen Hurts thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it now that I'm the beer that I opened is already warm.
Yeah, I was about to just take off my headset and walk away and let you just run with it. No, man, I get your frustration, with Hurts. I guess the only thing you can say is if for some reason within that building they've got concerns all of a sudden about Wentz, beyond just, durability. And who knows? I mean, there could be. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories about how the locker room doesn't like Carson Wentz. I don't think he intentionally is trying to be divisive, but like people either like him or they don't. He doesn't seem to be a guy that can get everyone to gravitate to him. So maybe there's something to that. But the thing is, I mean, I'm with you. I still think, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I feel like you could have targeted something like that, even if you wanted to wait until the 3rd round, but they probably felt for whatever reason, if they wanted him, they had to have him right there. The one thing I will say is this is a really well-coached team. They do a lot of things, really well from game planning and they do actually think typically about roster construction really well. So, I mean, they put themselves in a position to be able to do some things like this. I mean, unfortunately, they do have a lot of needs, like you said, on the defensive side of the ball, and you could have taken, a playmaker here for Carson Wentz, like a Mims, or somebody like that. So I totally get it. I guess, the one thing, I would say is that they spent so much time without Wentz. And if they fell in love with this guy and thought they couldn't get him afterwards, maybe there's just something behind the scenes, Drake, that, we don't know, because these things do kind of make you just like, you're like, man,
it
really?
blows you away. And Hurts is kind of a project. He's not a guy who's going to come in here this year and say Wentz goes down. You're not going to feel comfortable having this kid.
But I think it's a case.
Snaps.
I think it's a case even in the NFL, right? They're not, even though they're the best, right, at what they do, and they evaluate, these players all the time. We've seen that the draft is a very inefficient market, and we've also seen that teams will jump on bandwagons. And I think you see this happen. There's these cyclical bandwagons. Remember when everybody thought, oh, we can go get 2 tight ends and they'll be Gronk and they'll be Aaron Hernandez. Well, now I think, you see a guy like Lamar Jackson light up the league last year. And then I think people can fall in love. And, Jalen Hurts, obviously nobody's going to mistake him for being as speedy or electric, but he is a running quarterback. He brings, some versatility to your offense. And I think people can have that. I think it can make them put on rose-colored glasses, right? And think, man, look what Lamar Jackson did. Look at what, Pat Mahomes, he runs some too. Look at him. Look at, what Dak Prescott's doing. He can move some. And I think it can lull you into, oh my gosh, this guy's the next one of those. And you start to overlook other things. Like Matt talked to us about Hurts, and he loves him, but at the same time, he was more along the lines of, man, he shouldn't be, a guy taken, early. He's a guy you let develop. And it is funny because Hurts was a guy that people, even through the year at Oklahoma, a lot of people still felt, he was a 4th, 5th round pick. And then all of a sudden you did start hearing whispers in the couple of weeks leading up to the draft. He's climbing. So I think it was just a perfect mix for the Eagles to get, twisted around. As far as the rest of their moves, I think it's really more about they wanted to add enough potential vertical speed weapons that they feel they have enough on the roster, because the last 2 years, I think they've kind of gone into the season, Drake, with one, and it was fragile. Mike Wallace 2 years ago, last year, Deshaun Jackson.
They're old. Torrey Smith, Mike Wallace, Deshaun Jackson, 3 years ago.
And when they lost it, they completely lost that element to their offense. So I think what you see with going to add Goodwin, and then you draft, a little bit of speed later, and then you've got a guy like Deshaun Jackson potentially still on the team. It's kind of like, hey, between 2 or 3 of these guys, at least we can, hopefully on our roster, even if injury strikes, we can maintain some sort of vertical boundary pushing element to our offense that can open other things up underneath and help us just take a few shots to back people off of a lot of the stuff that their game is really based around, which is, more of those intermediate, and shorter type throws.
Just the last thing on Wentz and his the situation, his contract. So he just signed a new deal. So they're not even into his new deal yet. In 2024 is the final year of his deal. And Hurts being a 2nd-round pick, that's a 4-year contract. So 4 years from now, so 1, 2, 3, 4. After that 4th year, if they want to get rid of Wentz, he would take in 2024 a $6 million dead cap hit. That's not a lot. And, obviously be very tradable, and only a $21 million base salary. So there could be a question mark when you get down the road with these 2 quarterbacks. But the last guy we're going to talk about is Keyshawn Vaughn. And boy, oh boy, everyone was talking about the landing spot in Tampa Bay. Who are they going to get? This guy's going to fall into a situation with Brady, with Gronk now, with Evans, with Godwin, Arians in this offense. Holy smokes. And it's only Rojo. You only got to beat him out. The 12th pick of the 3rd round, Keyshawn Vaughn, I believe immediately replaces Ronald Jones. Good pass protector, as a guy who's going to be a downhill runner. Who knows if they add kind of a scat back, because we know Arians and Brady both enjoy that. But you can't argue Keyshawn Vaughn. He's going to be a 1st-round dynasty selection because, look at the opportunity. Oh, you got to beat out Ronald Jones? Come on. Me and you could beat out Ronald Jones, Wayne.
Yeah, Jones hasn't been good. He's definitely struggled. I think when we look at Vaughn, and it's a guy that they just, they stayed patient on it. They didn't, try to trade up or do anything fancy. But they still spent a decent pick on him. I believe it was 75th, 76th pick overall, something like that. So obviously, he's a guy that they wanted, and they felt the need to pull the trigger on him there. Even though they were patient. But yeah, I think that's the key, is that he's a guy that they felt could do everything, and that's the biggest takeaway I had from reading really the press conference stuff. So I think there's an opportunity. I think he's going to be the lead back, number 1. And I think number 2, there's an opportunity, for him to truly see, more of a 3-down role. Our buddy Dare, or Dare last year,
Boale, right?
Yeah. He actually was a serviceable pass catching down back. He's still on the roster. So it could really be they could ease Vaughn, in. But yeah, I think it just comes down to opportunity. You're going to be in a good offense, not a great offensive line, but you do have Tom Brady. He's going to be making the right checks, at the line. He's going to get you into some good positions. So I think from a right out of the gate kind of volume thing, you might have to make Vaughn the favorite for the most touches out of all the rookie running backs this year, just given the lack of, competition, that he's going to see. I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I think, out of, all the situations we're looking at, I would place, the opening wager would probably be, putting his odds at the highest.
I'm going to say he leads the league in post pass interference touchdowns, because with Gronk, Evans, and Godwin, how many PIs in the end zone are these guys going to draw? And then they just place the ball down at the 2, and then here comes Vaughn, busting into the end zone. But good stuff,
yeah.
Dwayne. Yeah,
one more. We have to do Chase Claypool, right?
Do we? I mean, I thought when I saw him picked, I go, they're going to play him at tight end.
Yeah, but that's not what they're saying. In their press conference, they're literally saying, hey, he's outside first and then an inside guy, and remember, like, they moved Juju inside. They already have Ebron, who they can play inside. Now Claypool's a guy they could rotate inside. When I look at this, and I think just about, the overall impact, we'll see if Claypool can do it. But I mean, he does have that unique size speed combo. It doesn't necessarily always show up on film as being someone that can separate, the way you would think he would be able to. They talked about his ability to win those 50-50 balls and how he didn't lose very many of those. But it was almost kind of like he's so much bigger than the guys that he's playing against, and so much better than a lot of that competition. It's like, what will it look like against NFL cornerbacks? I think that's still, a question for Claypool, but I think this is just a problem for James Washington. I think it's over for Mr. James Washington. He's more of a one-trick pony, plays well against zone like we talked about last year. We saw it in the preseason. If you want him to go high point a ball and make a big play down the field, great. But I think bringing in Claypool, to me, shows we're moving on, because I'll tell you right now, I think Deontay Johnson's safe. I think obviously Juju's safe, right? Deontay Johnson has the ability to do too many different things, in my opinion. And he played, if you look at what he did last year with the crappy quarterbacks they had as a rookie, I mean, it's pretty impressive what Deontay Johnson did. So I think I see Juju as the 1. I see Deontay Johnson as the 2. And I think James Washington's the guy that's out. In 11 personnel, it'll be Claypool, or maybe even a sneaky guy like Deion Kane, who was, well thought of by some coming out. Things just didn't click. He had some injuries in Indianapolis, but, Claypool's got the draft capital. So I think, you got Juju as your 1, Deontay as your 2. And then I think you got Ebron / Claypool, as your guys fighting out, for the remaining targets.
And they've done well with small, shifty guys there. It'll be interesting to see if they can get a big wide receiver to hit there in Pittsburgh. But as we know, when they draft guys, second, third round at wide receiver, they usually hit. So that's a good show right there. That's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run. I'm Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com. Next week, I think we got a good one. We got Graham Barfield of FantasyPoints.com, former lead analyst at NFL.com. So that's going to be a great show. Talk to Graham this week. He's going to join us. So the murderer's row of guests, as someone on Twitter once said, rolls on. So sorry you had to be stuck with just Dwayne and I this week. Dwayne's an A-list guest on any podcast that could have him, and I'm lucky to get him every single week. But thanks, folks. Follow me on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. He is at Dwain McFarland. And, of course, review on iTunes and YouTube. We will come to your house, knock on your door, and punch you in the face if you don't subscribe to this YouTube channel. Just search Fantasy Football Hustle. Anything before we get out of here, Dwayne?
No, man. No, great show. Tons of content. Loved it. Tried to hit as much as we can. Look forward to having Barfield on next week.
Yeah, man. Go take a nap, brother. You're working hard out here. Dwayne's like a hidden behind the scenes guy here. He's working hard to help us help these hospitals end the coronavirus. But we'll save that for another day. All right, folks. This has been The Hustle. We'll see you next week. Take care.